Hello and welcome to Tech Deals How-To Guide, how to install additional system memory, how to replace a power supply, and how to install a graphics card into a basic mini tower pre-built computer. I have here an Acer Aspire 4th generation pre-built mini tower computer. Many machines from Dell, HP, Lenovo, Acer, Asus all come in computer cases about this size. I'm going to show you today the installation of RAM, the power supply, and the graphics card to help you do upgrades on your own machine. As you follow along in this video, some of the ports, some of the plugs may be in slightly different locations, but they should all be basically the same shape, the same type, the same size. They just might be positioned inside the case in slightly different locations. Here you can see inside the computer case. We've removed the side panel to show you the inside parts. Really briefly, this right here is your power supply. This computer comes with a very basic 200-watt power supply. This is not powerful enough for most graphics cards. I will tell you that this power supply did successfully run a NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1050 and 1050 Ti, but it won't run much more than that. We are going to replace it today with this EVGA 400-watt power supply, which will give us plenty of power for add-in graphics cards. This fan right here covers our main CPU. This computer has an i5-4440. It is actually the computer that I have used in my video benchmark test, if you've been following my channel, that compare the 2nd, 4th, and 6th generation gaming performance. This is actually the exact machine that I've been using. We have two system memory slots right here in the center. You can see one of them is currently occupied. We are going to fill the other one with some system RAM. And then we have our open graphics card slot down at the bottom to install a graphics card in just a minute. Over here near the front of the machine we have our hard drive. And then you can't quite see it, but you can see the red cable and plug. I have added a solid state drive to this machine in the past already. It simply screws into these screw mount holes right here. It actually just uses 3 of them. It is a standard 2.5-inch solid state drive, which I have previously added to this machine. And then at the top here, this back part is actually the DVD drive, which is accessible from the front of the machine right here. The first thing we're going to do is remove the existing power supply. Now to do this, there's going to be some cables that we want to pull in order to free up some space. You do want to make sure that you know where things were plugged in so that you can plug them back in the same spot. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect the data cables from the drives. These simply pull straight out of the motherboard and the drives, and this will make it easier to remove the power supply and the various cables it plugs into. I have now removed all 3 of the drive cables from the hard drive, the SSD, and the DVD drive. Now we need to disconnect the power cables. The power cables, the serial ATA cables, are larger and longer, and they just slide straight off. You can see one right there. We'll slide the SSD cable off, and then we'll slide the power cable to the DVD drive off, just like so. There are 2 more cables that need to be disconnected. The first is right here with all of this multicolored ribbon cable. It's the 24-pin ATX connector. The one we're going to be connecting it looks just like this. This is the 24-pin. It's actually a 20+4-pin connector on the new power supply. We have to take the existing one off the motherboard first. Now, this is going to be by far the trickiest cable to unplug because there are 24 separate pins that all come up at once and it's very tight. Take your time. Do not pull too hard. You run the risk of breaking your motherboard if you just yank on it. You need to work it up by rocking it side to side, back and forth slowly as it just loosens and comes right off the motherboard. And here we have the 24-pin cable disconnected. You can see the 24 pins, 2 rows of 12, and the socket on the motherboard. It was tight. Many of these are on very tight. There is on the end of the clip a release peg that you do have to push in with your thumb to release it from the board. Push it on that and just rock it back and forth gently, not too much, until it comes loose from the motherboard. There is one more cable we need to disconnect, and this particular system has a 4-pin CPU power connector. It is directly above the CPU slot. Please note, some systems have a 4-pin CPU connector, some systems have an 8-pin. The new power supplies all come with what's called a 4+4 connector. And this is what it looks like on the new power supply. There are 2 4-pin, 2 rows of 2 each. This actually connects together. For systems that need 8 pins, you connect it. For systems that need 4, you separate it and you only use half. They are keyed and shaped, so you can only plug the correct half in the correct way. This comes off the motherboard the same way. There is a small release peg on the side. Push that in, and it slides straight out just like so. And that's it. The power supply is now completely disconnected from our computer. There are only 5 cables to worry about, and that's only because I have the solid-state drive. There were 3 serial ATA power cables, 1 24-pin connector to the motherboard, and 1 4-pin to the CPU. That's it. At this point, you will need a standard Phillips screwdriver because the back of the power supply is screwed into the case using 4 screws. We're simply going to unscrew the 4 screws at this point. And there is our final screw disconnected. So now the power supply is no longer screwed into the case. It actually slides forward a bit to clear the metal rim of the case and then simply comes straight out, just like so. And it just lifts straight out of the machine. You can see the power supply is simply a box. And if we hold up our new power supply, you'll notice they are this. Now, the new one is black and the old one is silver, but they're the same shape. The plugs are in the same spot in the back. Now, the old power supply, there was a small 92, or that even might be an 80 millimeter fan. I'd have to measure it. That is a small exhaust fan on the old power supply. You'll notice we don't have one on the EVGA 400 watt, and that's because it has a very silent 120 millimeter fan, much quieter, much more reliable, turns slower, less noise. But otherwise, they're the same shape, and it's basically universally compatible with any modern machine. The first step is to insert the power supply into the machine. Now we are going to line it up, fan facing downwards, power plug to the back, and it's going to simply slide down into the same spot that we removed the previous power supply from. Keep in mind, and it just slides in just like so, keep in mind, don't plug the cables in until the power supply is in, because as you move the cables around, you'll slide the power supply around. You don't want to risk it falling on your component. So screw the power supply in first, then plug in the cables. Our power supply is in place. We are now going to screw it in. And there's our final screw in place. So all 4 screws are now in the back and the power supply is secure in our machine. We now have a wonderful high quality 400 watt EVGA power supply. First things first, always install this first. 24-pin cable. Now, this comes as a 20+4 connector. What you'll need to do is rotate this around and actually connect the 2 pieces together. There's 2 tabs on either side that will connect it together. There's all 24 pins, and that's simply going to slide onto the motherboard. It's tabbed, so it only goes in one direction. Okay, so I've got the 24 pins held together. I figured out that this part goes towards the top. Mounting orientation does vary from system to system. You may not have this particular computer, so you have to look on the board and match up the orientation of the pegs, which are shaped, to figure out how it installs. I've got the cable set up. I'm actually going to put the excess cable above the DVD drive. There's nothing up there, so it's fine, and it keeps it out of the airflow and out of the way of the case. And I'm simply going to install it just like so. And now we have our 24-pin ATX power connector successfully installed on the board with the excess cable run directly above the DVD drive. The next step is to install our CPU power cable. As I said before, this is a 4+4, total of 8 pins, because some systems will use all 8 pins. They slide together if you need all 8. If not, you're only going to use half of it. Now, if you install half of this, you're going to be left with this extra cable just dangling in place. My recommendation is to use a plastic zip tie and actually tie around the extra piece away from it so that it does not get into your system fan or otherwise block anything in your system. So all I'm going to do is take this zip tie and wrap this around, push this over, and tie that into place. And then I'm going to use my clippers to clip off the excess amount so that doesn't get into anything. At this point, I can then install the CPU power connector onto the motherboard, just like so, and the extra piece of the connector is not going to get into anything. Now, there is a lot of excess cable. This can either be tied up or it can simply be pushed directly above the DVD drive, which is what I'm going to do now. And there we go. The cable is tucked nicely away with the excess cable above the DVD drive. We have 3 more cables coming out of our power supply. The first one I want to address is this one. This has 3 4-pin Molex power connectors. These are largely obsolete at this point. These have been around for a long time, decades, and most machines no longer use them. Now, if you have a computer that actually needs one of these 4-pin Molecs, by all means, use it. Plug it into whatever drive or whatever device you may need. I don't need them in this machine, so I'm going to tie this cable up and put it away. I would like to point there is also a 4-pin floppy power connector. I haven't used a floppy drive in more than 10 years, but if you have something that needs a floppy power connector, it does have one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this cable here and I'm going to wrap it around and over itself and loop it one more time. I am not going to just shove it in there above the DVD drive because that would create a mess and possibly create tangling. Instead, I'm going to take another of my zip tie cables. There will be a link in the video description below. This is, I don't know, $5 or $7 on Amazon and Newegg. It is a pack of like 200 different zip ties, different sizes. If you have them, fine, but these are plastic. They're one-time use each. They're not very expensive. I use them all the time. I love them. All I'm going to do here is I'm going to run this around, and I'm simply going to tie this off so they stay together. And so we have that neatly tied off, or neatly enough. I'm going to take my trimmers and I'm going to trim the excess piece off. And then I'm going to take the rest of this and I'm simply going to stick it above the DVD drive. The next cable we're going to address is this one. This has 4 serial ATA power connectors on it. 2 here and 2 here. This is going to provide the power for our DVD drive, our SSD solid state drive, and our hard drive. Now, reach is sometimes a concern. This has only a single cable with serial ATA connectors. There are extensions and adapters you can get to make these longer or add additional ones if you need them. However, we're not going to. The very first one here I'm going to install on the DVD drive like so. So you can see that we have installed the power connector to the DVD drive. It's behind the black sleeved ATX cable. A little bit hard to see down there, but that is now plugged in. We could take our next power cable and try to plug it into the solid state drive, but it doesn't quite reach. It's really close, but we'd be stretching. Instead, we're going to skip that cable, and instead we're going to go to the next plug and we're going to install that one instead. And that slides in just like so. The last power connector will plug into the hard drive just like that. Now we are left with a cable that's a bit loose. I'm simply going to tuck that just behind this cable, and that's going to stay. Friction will keep that there. You can zip tie it if you want to, but I'm not worried about that. That's pretty tight. That's going to stay there. All of our drives are now plugged in. Our hard drive, our solid state drive, our DVD drive, the motherboard ATX power connector, the CPU power connector. 5 connectors came out, 5 connectors went in. The machine is actually ready to use right now. It's configured exactly the way it was, except we do have to plug back in our data cables. And there we have all 3 data cables plugged back in. One for the hard drive, one for the solid state drive, and tucked way back there you can't really see is the DVD drive plugged back in. But wait, there is one more new cable. This one right here, and this is the whole reason we replaced the power supply in the first place. PCI Express power connectors. This one in fact has 2 of them. We're really only going to use one of them. In a machine like this, there's only going to be one graphics card. However, if you had a graphics card that had an 8-pin and a 6-pin, you can combine these 2 pieces right here, plus this, providing you with a single 8-pin and a single 6-pin. I am likely only ever going to use one of these. We are going to show the installation of that of the video card in just a minute. The next step is to install our system RAM. Now we will get to the graphics card in a minute, but next we're doing our system RAM. This is a DDR3 memory module, double data rate version 3 memory. Now there's also DDR2 and DDR4 RAM. The notch here on the golden fingers, the bottom that inserts into the machine, that is in a different physical location from DDR2, DDR4, and this DDR3. It is not physically possible to accidentally install the wrong kind of memory into your machine. This particular machine uses DDR3. Be sure to buy the type of memory that your machine uses. Now, the memory slots on the motherboard usually will have these tabs on either end of them. These are retention tabs. Oftentimes, they will be directly standing up. You do have to push them out in order to insert the memory. They will automatically snap in when you put the memory in correctly. It's also worth noting that the system memory, the notch, is not in the center. You cannot reverse the memory. It only goes in one way. You want to make sure to line that notch up with the notch on the motherboard. Furthermore, the memory goes straight down and straight out. It does not go in at an angle. It doesn't tilt left and right. It goes in vertically. It comes out vertically. It will take some pressure on both ends of the memory module at the same time in order to click it into place. When you hear the click and when these tabs snap in by themselves, the memory will be in successfully. To demonstrate this, I'm actually going to remove the existing memory module first to show you how easily it comes out, then I'll reinsert it. To take out memory, you simply push out on the tabs on either end, and the memory pops up a few millimeters. Then it simply slides out with no pressure at all. If you try to physically pull the memory out, you'd break it. So be sure to push these tabs out first. To install the memory back in, I'll actually switch it. It doesn't matter which ones they go into. I'll put the memory there. And then I simply push down with both fingers. And there's 2 clicks and the memory's in place. I will take the other memory module, lining the tab up with the slot on the motherboard. And there are 2 guide grooves on either end that it slides into. And then you simply push down with your 2 thumbs. Click, click, you're done. There is no configuration, there's no customizing, there's nothing you have to do. Windows will automatically use that extra RAM. At this point, we've now doubled the main system RAM. So if you, for example, have a machine with 8 gigabytes of RAM and a single stick, buy another 8 gigabyte stick and you'll have 16. If you have a machine with 4 and you buy another 4, then you'll have 8. Yes, it's possible to mix sizes in most cases, although it's generally not recommended. But yes, you could install a 4 and an 8 or an 8 and a 16. The last thing we're doing today is our graphics card. Now this is a nice case because it's toolless. This tab right here simply comes straight off the edge, revealing the slots that we're going to plug our graphics card into. Now I have already previously removed the metal blocks that are blocking our slots. There are pieces of metal that you physically have to break off using a screwdriver. There's a little notch to insert a screwdriver in and tear them off, which is why I've got empty spaces there. If you have not put a graphics card in before, you may have to take those metal tabs off before you can install a graphics card. We're going to take our new graphics card, and I want to point out a couple of things about graphics cards, which are all pretty much the same in general. First, we have our PCI Express slot on the bottom, the actual golden fingers which insert into the motherboard. We have the slot on the motherboard they'll slide into. That is an X16 slot, and most pre-builts are only going to have one of them. Many of these cards come with a protective cover over this. I've already removed this one. Be sure to take it off before you put it on. On the back of the card, we have, I'm not going to take these off right now, but they're protective covers over the video ports. And then we have an L-shaped metal bracket. This L-shaped bracket is actually going to rest right here on the case underneath the edge of the case. When we bring the graphics card down, you cannot put it directly towards the slot because you'll run into the side of the case. You need to bring it forward a bit, and as you come down, once you clear the edge of the case, then you've got to move back before you hit the motherboard and insert it into the slot. Now, last point I'll make. Each of these slots is a little bit different on different types of motherboards. This one has a plastic release tab that just bends and flexes. Some slots are going to have a retention tab similar to the memory slots where you actually have to push it down. You'll insert the card and it will pop up just like the memory slots, the tabs on the memory did. To remove a graphics card from such a machine, you would actually need to reach down with your finger and push the tab down. Usually they're white, but sometimes they're black, and that will release the graphics card to take it out. In this case, to remove the graphics card, you would pull this to the side and then pull the card out while holding it to the side. It's just a different design for a slot. So now I'm going to take the card, I'm going to slide it down, and you may have to move the cables just a bit with your hand. Once this metal L bracket is clear of the case, then I can come back towards the edge and line it up, and then I can insert the card into the slot just like so. And sometimes it takes a little bit of rocking back and forth. Now, Some machines do not have this toolless mechanism. Some machines have a screw you have to remove from here. Some machines need the card to be physically screwed in. Your particular machine may be slightly different in this regard, but the principles are largely the same. In this case, there are some retention tabs that I just need to push the video card onto, just like so, and then this metal tab then holds it in place. Now there are holes and I could physically screw it in, but I change graphics cards often so I don't screw them in. This is enough because I don't move my machine around. The graphics card is now successfully installed in place, but it needs power. If you look here, you will see an 8-pin PCI Express power connector. This is why we've put our power supply in place. For those of you curious, this is the Gigabyte GeForce GTX 1070 Mini. Yes, I said 1070. This is a very small single fan card. I will be doing upcoming performance videos and temperature testing in this small case with a GTX 1070 to see how well it works. I'll do a 1060 and a 1070, as well as I'll see if I can fit an RX 470 and 480 into this machine. So if you're not subscribed to my channel, be sure to subscribe to my channel to get notifications of when those videos come out. Finally, we take our PCI Express power cable here. We are going to need an 8-pin, and in this case, this simply slides on just like so, and that actually holds on securely. That creates an 8-pin PCI Express power connector. We are not going to use the 6-pin. So what am I going to do? I'm going to tie it off. And here you can see it all zipped off. I've got it zipped off. I cut off the excess. That extra cable is now not going to get into our way. I'm going to take my 8-pin PCI Express power connector and I'm going to slide it directly into the card. And here you can see our PCI Express power connector plugged into the card. However, do you notice a very large cable sitting there? This is where our ties come into play. We want to make sure this cable is secure, so I'm going to tie it so it doesn't get in the way. And here we are with it tied off. I've looped the cable back around and I've zip tied it to the serial ATA cable to hold it in place. These zip ties are incredibly handy to have. This is now not going anywhere. This is not going to get into our CPU fan. It's not going to get into the graphics card. It's not going to touch the motherboard. That is much better than just leaving loose cables in your system. All that's left to do at this point is to replace the cover to the machine. And our system upgrade is complete. This has been the how-to guide to install system RAM, replace the power supply, and install a graphics card into a basic pre-built mini tower computer. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel using the big huge red button directly below this video. Questions and comments in the comment section below, and as always, check out my video description below. Everything I mentioned in this video, the 400 watt power supply, the small GTX 1070 video card, and some system RAM options will all be linked down below. Please check out my video description if you found this video helpful and useful in any way. That's where all the good stuff is. Thank you so much for watching my video. I will see you next time.